Hey guys, today's story is about a barbarian that isn't metagaming, trust me. Oh, and a boring DM. I first started playing D&D a few months ago. I jumped into a random pickup game on Roll20, one originally just titled New Players, One Shot. And it was kind of fun, since it was my first foray into the concept of RPGs. But, in retrospect, the more I play, the more I see what an aggressively mediocre GM that this story is going to be about. In total, the campaign ran for about 12 sessions, and I was the only player who lasted for the whole 12. We were losing players constantly, and the GM kept having to find new people. The toxic atmosphere, the profound, bland genericness of the game's story itself, and this one jerk player who never faced any consequences. It got so bad that one guy even rage quit. So firstly, tell your players what kind of campaign that it's going to be. I created a gnome bard con artist, with few combat skills, but expertise in negotiating, illusions, and general trickery. The game was just a really long dungeon delve with nothing but combat. Secondly, if you have literally no imagination, use a pre-made module. It was a homebrew campaign in an abandoned mine, where we had almost no lore and no NPCs. If you want to focus on combat in a giant dungeon, make combat and dungeons interesting. We revisited the same identical bland rooms hundreds of times. And for 12 sessions, we had a total of 6 different enemies. Skeletons, animated armor, flying swords, a golem, a skeleton minotaur, and a skeleton captain. And none of them had any abilities beyond they attack with their weapon. Every combat situation was just throwing bodies at us until they all died. The difficulty was also extremely trivial. We started recruiting the skeletons instead of fighting them because of how much of a non-threat they all were. Thirdly, don't audibly grunt whenever a player succeeds at a check while trying a creative approach. My character has a +10 to persuasion and deception, so maybe don't be surprised or pissed off when I win at disadvantage. Or give us enemies that have a high enough intelligence and wisdom so that I struggle to convince them. He pretty clearly hated the fact that we were trying to talk our way out of a fight with the 27th band of generic skeletons. The other players, even the barbarian metagamer, were really into talking to the enemies as well, and the GM clearly disliked the fact that we were recruiting all the skeletons to our banner, but kept throwing skeletons at us for some weird reason. Eventually, we had this horrible session where all the skeleton army that we had amassed suddenly turned on us for no apparent reason. We excruciatingly had to kill all of these skeletons that we had named and helped, and charisma didn't work anymore because it doesn't work anymore. It was absolutely miserable, and the other players hated it as well. I talked to the GM afterwards, and I told him that if he wanted to get rid of the skeletons, he could have just told us, and we could have just sent them on a special mission or something. And the GM made the right choice, and decanonized that session, so we sent them off to recruit other skeletons, and they could all come back for some epic battle later. But, later on, we found all of their dead bodies. Fourthly, and most importantly, keep your players in check. There was one player, the barbarian, who was kind of a mess. He was also the only other person to attend every session, except for one. He was that guy, and a metagaming jerk who regularly insulted people for not playing super tactically, even though he didn't understand the rules himself. He showed up on the second day, and even though the rules stated, voice required, he said he was mic shy, and exclusively used the game chat. This would usually not be that bad, except he was extremely slow at typing, and barely intelligible, so he slowed the whole game to a screeching halt. And he kept asking the same 3 stupid questions every turn, and clearly didn't understand turn structure. He would say, "I jump in to block," when that's not really a mechanic, or even, "I attack," out of turn constantly. I assumed that he was 9, or foreign from his spelling. But several times he jumped into voice just to interrupt us outside of his turn, to say, "Hey, look at chat," with a deep voice and American accent. One of the other players as well, a dark elf, who was on his second day, was getting really frustrated by the DM not knowing the basic game rules, and was calling the barbarian out on his annoying routine and blatant metagaming, like checking the monster manual to see what HP values they had, and so on. The barbarian responded to the criticism by saying, "I'm not metagaming, you butthole." And the dark elf player instantly quit on the spot, and the barbarian faced no consequences. I'm assuming some of the other dozen or so players partly left because of the barbarian's crap as well. I even considered leaving after that, and I only stayed because I had been in this campaign for a month already, and it would fall apart without me. And lastly, don't just ghost people. After 12 sessions, when we were finally near the final boss, the GM just up and vanished, never to be seen again. And when I went back home for the summer, my first game with my friend Diego blew my mind. Because I realized that D&D could actually be fun. I also became a better player. Well guys, the OP should have left when the Dark Elf left, after his little spat with the Barbarian, especially with how many red flags there were. And if you feel like you owe something to either the DM or to the game itself, like how the OP did, don't. Get out of there if the situation is bad. But in any case guys, that's the end of the story. If you liked it and would like to listen to more, make sure you sub and stay tuned for future videos. But, as always, have a good one.